Social exegesis is a way in which we can interpret the troubling events of our age and of our time. Our nation is divided over the events surrounding the riots in Baltimore or the uprisings in Ferguson as a result of the death of Michael Brown. We're divided over Donald Trump and what happened subsequently at his rallies. But even beyond what's happening in our nation, I'm concerned with what's happening in the Church of Jesus. We are just as divided as the world is on these kinds of matters. And so I wanted to offer a tool or an aid to help all of us in how we interpret these complex and even at times controversial events that we're plagued with on a regular basis. For just as we look at the Bible, there's a way to interpret the Bible in a sound way, to use certain rules of interpretation, which is what exegesis is, and that is a systematic way in interpreting and understanding the Bible. So we should also have a systematic way in understanding and interpreting the pages of life. So for instance, when you see something that happens in culture, or you read about something, or you're getting the news and the latest bombshell is dropped, how do we interpret that wisely so that we don't make a fool out of ourselves or do something that would injure us or others in our community or around us? So I would suggest we do 4 things. Number 1, we ask questions. Just ask questions. What is it that I'm seeing? What is the plain sense? Okay, a police officer either roughly apprehended or even murdered an unarmed person of color. Let me just keep on asking questions. What were the events surrounding this episode? What happened? And then we want to, number 2, we want to dig deeper, because if I were to place an iceberg in front of us, we would see the iceberg, but the greatest part of the iceberg is the part you can't see, which is below the surface. So we have to dig deeper and get below the surface and ask questions that deal with the history of the community or even the history of our nation to get a sound understanding of what's happening today in our lives. But after you ask questions and you dig deeper, you then have to be honest with your own biases, be honest with your own prejudices, be honest with your own experiences that can oftentimes jade how you can interpret not only the scripture, but also what's happening in society. How does my perspective as a black male influence my interpretation of what I'm seeing on the screen or what I'm seeing happening and played out in my community? And if we're honest, it has bearings, just like privilege can have bearings on our white brothers and sisters when they view a particular situation in our culture. Our Native American brothers, they come at things with a particular slant and bias based on their experiences. And so we all need to be honest with ourselves. But then finally, we need to do something. So after we ask questions and after we dig a little deeper and after we're honest about our own biases, we then need to do something, because if we see injustice occurring, then God has called us as his people to be agents of change, to be people who will stand up in ways that can be measured, where we can be counted for, where we can do something. And so for some of us that may be demonstrating or marching, for some of us that may be confronting not only personal racism, but perhaps systemic and institutional racism in levels where we have influence and access, what can we do to bring about change for the better, not only for ourselves, but for our neighbor, irregardless of their race, their gender, or their class? How do we make America better? How do we make the church better? Well, it starts with us being the best people that we can be. And so I believe Jesus calls for that, as he calls us to be the light and to be the salt. So social exegesis, man, how can I look at these troubling events in our society and walk away with an objective and even balanced interpretation that leads to action? That's social exegesis.